Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is episode 141 of the Meet the Farmers podcast, and I'm your host, Ben Eagle. Today on the show, I'm speaking to my boss over on the Kite podcast, senior consultant at Kite Consulting, Becki Leach. She's a keen runner, and she's previously run the London Marathon for the Farm Safety Foundation, Yellow Wellies. Becki also has a particular interest in leadership and people management, and this is one of the things she specialises in at Kite. People is definitely an aspect we're going to talk about today. Largely, she is absolutely passionate about the agricultural sector and its future, and it's always a pleasure to talk to her about that. And Becki also shares my interest in eating cheese.
Definitely.
Becki, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on. You have the honour of following on from Chris, who was on last week's episode. I've given the listeners a brief introduction, but can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Ben. Thanks for finally having me on the Meet the Farmers podcast. I'm not going to say I've been waiting for the invite, but clearly have. So I'm Becki Leach. I'm senior consultant, as you said, at Kite Consulting. I have a dad and a husband who are both full-time farmers, which means I get to do a little bit of part-time farming on weekends and evenings and busy times. Worked for Kite for coming up 18 months. No, gosh, COVID really, it is longer than that. Yeah. That's what COVID does to you. I've lost all concept. 2.5 years, coming up 3 years this summer. And Kite, for anybody who doesn't know, because realise there's quite a wide reach of the listenership of this podcast. Kite is a dairy consultancy business predominantly, sort of technical consultancy, business consultancy, increasingly environmental consultancy, and then people management consultancy, which was where most of my work sits. And we work both with farmer clients and corporate dairy industry clients.
Tell us about your life growing up. As you weren't born on a farm, but you moved to a tenanted farm when you were 4, and your dad became a first-generation farmer. What was that like, and what did he farm? How did he start out?
So moved to the farm when I was 4, just before my sister, my middle sister, was born. Okay. Only relatively small farm, urban fringe area. Probably like most farm kids, and especially most first-generation farm kids, I was meant to earn my keep, let's put it that way. But me and Dad have always had a really close relationship, shared a passion for outdoors, farming, country lifestyle. So I was literally like my dad's shadow. Probably farm in terms of the ethos or the work ethic of my dad, extremely hardworking, and I think that's something he instilled into me. I certainly feel like it. I suppose I'll let others be the judge of that, but really hard work ethic, commitment to livestock, understanding of the rural sector, as it were.
I think I remember you saying that when you were at school, you were sort of in the minority of farm kids.
Yeah, so we're sort of urban fringe in Bradford. So I'm probably only 25 minutes drive out of the very, very centre of the city. Okay. So we're in a rural-ish village, but ultimately went to quite an urban school. So
like me.
Yeah, people just don't get it. I remember certainly like secondary school and more senior school, all my friends I say all my friends, I have a few very close friends who I still remain friends with now. But we're going ice skating on the weekend, and and I'm like, I'm mucking calves out on the weekend. But yeah, probably just a bit of that urban rural divide, really.
Yeah, but I mean, did you enjoy school?
Yeah, I didn't not enjoy it. I quite enjoy achievement, and a sense of achievement.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Anything where I can sort of do something and feel like I've achieved something. I didn't dislike it. I think I probably it's funny when you look back, isn't it? I probably didn't appreciate at the time. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't not like school, but I wouldn't say I was like, oh, yay, I can go to school every day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But and also around that time, if you sort of think back, what were your thoughts about farming then? And I find this with certainly a lot of first generation farm kids. I'm really interested in their particular perception of farming as a career and going forward versus sort of part of your life. How did you see farming then, and did you see it as part of your future, or agriculture broadly as part of your future?
Yes, always saw agriculture as part of my future. I think the one thing in hindsight, and the bit that whenever I talk into any sort of school age or young people, and I think you get I remember sitting in the careers advisor's office, and I'm pretty sure every farm kid will have this story. And the words that came out of the career advisor's mouth were, well, you're a bit too smart to be a farmer and you're a bit too dumb to be a vet.
Wow.
And to be fair, I only had that tunnel vision. I either thought you had to be a hands-on farmer and, first generation farmer. Dad, had some trusted advisors, but we didn't see, we didn't have a nutritionist coming onto the farm weekly. We used the vet when we had sick animals, probably, rather than proactively as like we do nowadays. And, it was a different time back then. I didn't really realise all the allied industry and, food production careers that are associated with the agricultural industry that you now know exist.
Yeah, I mean, on that, what's your perception of the gauge of seeing, of youngsters actually sort of seeing that breadth of opportunity, and how that filters into careers advice on a sort of on a teenager level, I suppose?
I'd love to think it's got loads better. I don't think it probably has, in terms of, I think if you talk about agriculture as a career option, I'm not sure that there's a champion sat in the careers office saying, well, actually, agriculture and food production is really diverse. There are organisations that do that, and in the past, probably not as well, certainly not as much recently with COVID, but I've volunteered to go into schools to talk about the food supply industry and to try and impart some of that knowledge as much on the kids as the teachers.
Okay.
But I'm not sure I blame the careers advisors either. I'm not quite sure. When I think about other career sectors, I think about IT.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the range of, or the variation or the level of IT careers are, nor, in lots of other manufacturing sectors, astrophysics,
Exactly.
or, I don't know the details.
So you did a degree in applied animal science at Bishop Burton College, which I think is part of the University of Hull. And you've done further technical study at Nottingham Trent. Tell me about those experiences.
Well, getting to Bishop was a bit of an epiphany, really, because I'd gone from this sort of urban school. So I did A-levels at school and, GCSEs, A-levels, did okay at those. Then went to Bishop and sort of was with loads of people that thought like me and had the same passions as me. And so it was really, it was really brilliant to get there. And even the lecturers as well, when you come from an urban school with teachers who don't get your industry, and probably don't have a lot of the same, not ethics or morals as you, or beliefs as you, to then end up in a place where nearly everybody there felt and thought like I did was brilliant.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of choice of degree, in hindsight, I wish I'd done something with more business elements. But again, probably linking back to not knowing the opportunities and the allied industries and stuff that were out there, I sort of hung my hat on being quite technically competent. So hence the animal science degree. And I did some sort of distance study it wasn't distance study, it was part-time study at Nottingham Trent, which was on, nutrition and feeding and what have you. And I really hung my hat on having technical expertise.
Okay. And then as a result, you first became an animal health and welfare officer at Kirklees Council. How did you get that job, and what appealed to you about that kind of role?
What appealed to me about that kind of role? Well, again, I think I was still a little bit finding my feet. So when I went to Bishop, I travelled every day. So I lived at home. I still wanted to keep my finger in / not miss out on anything.
Yeah.
At home. So I travelled every day. I wanted a job that was still allowed me to be hands-on at home, because that was quite important to me at the time. And still is to a certain extent. I think, what did I want from the job? Well, I wanted a job. I was straight out of uni, so let's be quite frank. I wanted a job that vaguely related to
it's
something.
that stage we're all in, isn't it? It's like, just need something.
Yeah. It was relatively local, but it wasn't on my doorstep, which especially in that role, because it was almost a bit of enforcement type role. So I was basically one of those dreaded people, and West Yorkshire is really funny about how they organise their local authority, but essentially it's like a animal health officer trading standards type role.
Okay.
So I was inspecting the lairage side of slaughterhouses. I was doing horse riding establishment license. I was doing farm visits to like welfare checks, but also, the people that come and check your movement records and what have you. I think I probably realised in that role that I'm definitely a farmer at heart. So I'm not going to say I didn't do a good job, but I possibly was, the trials and tribulations of being a farmer, don't you? And actually, I think we got a long way with that. When you can see the medicine books clearly all in one pen, all been updated the night before, because we didn't have online. People were keeping manual records then. Actually, it was quite powerful to be able to pull the farmer's leg and sort of say, that must have been harder work, racking your brains about, how much pen and strep you'd used.
I suppose linked to that as well, because obviously you were going around meeting a lot of different people in different areas of the industry as well. What was how useful was that experience in terms of, I mean, you're very much, I've only known you the last couple of years, but you're very much a people person, very good at engaging with lots of different people. How key was that experience for sort of almost training yourself in that sort of mindset?
Yeah, I love people. I love cows and I love people. And a job that allows me to combine the two, really was pretty dreamy. It was good for what I would call like cutting my teeth, as in, yes, there's farmers local and you go to other people's farm and what have you, but and you learn all the stuff that you learn at uni, but there is, it's a bit like driving into, everybody says you learn everything about driving once you've passed your test. I'd passed the degree, I'd got the experience at home, so I had enough to not sound daft or stupid, but getting to see lots of different farms and, a massive range, like it was in Huddersfield, and you'd have tiny little family farms, and then you'd have really big commercial operations. Then you'd have, people running moorland. If anybody knows the M62 with the farm in the middle, Paul, he actually falls in, runs thousands of sheep over the Pennines. And so there's every extreme of, and it was good for me experiencing a huge diversity of farm systems and people, diversity of people. And learning some slang that I didn't realise was only Yorkshire slang versus Huddersfield slang versus
such as
well,
you can't say that and not say.
Well, the 1,000,001 names for spare lambs or cared lambs. So we always called them tups at home, but even the rams. I think the first time I heard somebody call it a ram, I'm like, what the hell's a ram?
Really?
Yeah, because it's they were always tups.
Yeah, always tups. Yeah.
I said something the other day to a southern colleague at Kite who pulled me up on it about having a till spreader, and they asked me what the heck a till spreader was. So for southerners listening to the podcast, it's a fertilizer spreader. I said something about proving at one point, which again for the southern listeners is cake or hard feed. So yes, learning farming slang as well.
That's great. So after that role, you moved to Dovecote Park, where you visited supplier farms to procure cattle based on spec and different standards. What did you learn from that role?
Well, the role at Dovecote was a huge amount of driving, and it was countrywide. So I was doing like 55,000 mile a year in the
Blimey.
car, and essentially doing like full-time work when I was there. So again, it sort of widened out the breadth and I mean, I've got a massive farm member. Used to go down into the Midlands and look at all these, lowland
Oh my
pastures
goodness. It's
where
exactly what I
mixed
get in the back in the
oh,
days when I used to travel for this podcast. Yeah, you get that all the time.
mixed farming where they were growing cereals to fatten the cattle. So from a farming perspective, it sort of widened that grounding again. It got me, meeting more people, building a network, which I enjoy. So not just meeting individuals, but sort of building a network of farmers.
Yeah.
I suppose the other side of things, which I think really feeds into my career now, is the interaction with a supermarket with a buyer. So Dovecote are dedicated beef, veal and venison suppliers to Waitrose. So starting to work with their ag teams and understand, commerciality, why carcass specs so important, why, and relating that back to shelf sizes and purchasing behaviour and consumer behaviour. And, it sort of built my expertise on that side of things.
Yeah. When did you meet Dave?
Oh God. Um,
Dave listens, by the way, is Becky's husband.
It's all very sad and very farming and very not incestuous literally, but Dave probably met me before I knew I'd met him, because I was probably 6 or 7. Dave was the son of the neighbouring farmer. So between where I live now with my husband Dave and my dad's farm is across our 2 back fields, over a road and down dad's 2 back fields. So yeah, we met.
Home is where the heart is.
Yeah, we met really young, and got together when I was just 16, pretty much. And yeah, I think Dad was delighted and thought that all his baling needs would be met for the rest of his life.
So going back to your career, for 3 years, you were at the AHTB, specializing in dairy. Why did you want that role, and what did you learn from it? So you'd almost move towards this idea of working on that national stage by going to Dovecote and traveling around. So why the AHDB? What appealed about that?
Because it was a role specifically that appealed. So dairy was, I'd done bits and come, in the background, sort of on the periphery. But the fact that it was working with dairy farmers, and the other bit was when I read, it's now what they call agri leader. When I was there, it was dairy leader, and before I started, it was just been formed as this sort of dairy leader. So essentially, when Amanda Ball was at AHDB Dairy as strategy director, they'd done some research that said who are our levy payers, what do they look like, and they sort of came up with this category of levy payers who were high performing technically, high performing financially, and by default then were very big levy payers, but that maybe the AHDB knowledge exchange delivery wasn't meeting their needs. Okay. So they then recruited somebody specifically to find out what those people wanted and deliver, hopefully, to their needs. So it was the business element, because by this time I'd sort of realised that I quite enjoy the commercial as well as the technical. So the business element of it, it was working with dairy farmers. And when I went to the interview, it was probably that they didn't know exactly what the role looked like, which from my perspective meant that I could make it look like what I wanted to. Because shock horror for anybody who knows me, I don't particularly respond well to being told what to do or how to do it. I think this when I went, they sort of, just make these, just deliver something that makes them happy. And I was like, right, fine, tell me what the budget is. Tell me, you've given me the outcome. Tell me what the budget is, and let me go away and do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I did. And again, it's a role that involved being directly in contact with farmers, which is what really fuels my fire.
Yeah. And then, I mean, all that came about, led to, in 2019, you came to Kite. Apart from producing the podcast, of course, which we've got to mention, just talk about your job and why you love what you do, really.
So my job at Kite is probably split in three. So externally, i.e. working with clients, I work with farmer clients, and I do people consultancy and a lot of recruitment. So ongoing people management consultancy. So I work with farms and their teams, and we might do some training sessions for the team, or we might do whole farm, labour reviews and think about the labour strategy going forward. I do a lot of probably facilitated performance reviews, I would call them, between, with the farmer owner operator and their employees, or facilitate team meetings with where there's large farm teams and large senior team. Also sort of external facing, I work on quite a big project with Arla, so heading up alongside John and Ros the R500 project. So lots of farmer meetings, benchmarking meetings, and obviously all the comms and everything that goes with that. And then internally, well, it's sort of internal but external facing, PR. And because of my social nature, I think I generally get involved in quite a lot of the events or conferences or stuff that Kite are doing that is about connecting with the people who we work for.
Yeah. Let's turn to the podcast for a bit, and listeners, please do go and check out the Kite podcast. It's a little bit different, which for an industry podcast, but yeah, please go and check that out. From your point of view, Becki, we were both involved from the beginning of this, but why did Kite think it was a good idea to make a specialist dairy podcast? Because I can remember when John first gauged the idea with me.
Yeah. I think your listeners are probably pre-warned. If you had Chris on last week, then
Chris was on really good behaviour last week.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, really good.
Well, listeners, if you do come over to the Kite podcast, don't expect him to always be on good behaviour. It's like trying to shepherd a cat. Why did we think it was important to start the Kite podcast? It was John's genius, to be fair, and it was literally as COVID just hit. So it was beginning of March 2020. I think the first episode was very end of March, if not just at the beginning of April. And as is the nature of Kite, about Kite's got a couple of things that is just absolutely phenomenal in my opinion. And I think it's why I feel like I fit in so well, is it's very reactive.
Yeah.
And the people and the team that work for the business are positive people who look for solutions. And it sort of is on the back of that, really, that the podcast came to be, and probably why you describe it as slightly different to most of the podcasts, because the pure purpose when it was set up was about getting information out to the people, to the farming community, not just clients, but to anybody who wanted to hear that information in a way that was easy to digest, and to bring a bit of positivity and optimism and a bit of light relief to, we forget, don't we, that it was pretty scary, wasn't it, in March and April 2020?
It was.
It was, people were fighting over toilet rolls, and
we
descended into anarchy. I know things didn't really change operationally on farm all that much, although they did, when you're looking from a dairy perspective, there were a couple of the milk buyers who, just didn't turn up for milk. There was the Muller reduction scheme that, so it was a really scary place. And I think, as with not not just about ensuring the success of dairy farmers going forward, because ultimately the kite business is built on their business. But, you know, that bit about some hope, some positivity, some, you know, regrounding and making sure that people didn't get lost in a tidal wave of negative news and feeling out of control.
Yeah. So you, like me, are very interested in farming PR engagement and getting involved. What do you think, in your view, and I know that you have an interest in other industries as well, and have an eye on other things that are going on. What do you think that we can learn from others in terms of how we can get our message across, but in a way that really engages and doesn't come across as preachy?
Oh God.
Big question.
Yeah, if I knew the answer to that. I think from an PR to the consumer perspective, we should never forget that the consumer and the general public have quite an endearing view of farmers.
Yeah.
You know, despite I can get really mad. I have taken to just blocking people on Twitter now. You know, if the antis, I now just block them. I think, but the general majority, the general public, like and trust farmers, and I think you've got to keep that at the core. I think people like people who are human. And it is actually one thing that I've found more difficult, because I, you know, again, as anybody who knows me, I have a very active personal Twitter profile that is very, very me. And I do quite a bit of the kite stuff now with the support from a couple of people in the team at head office as well. And it is quite a transition from doing PR, what I would call passive PR, versus active PR.
Yeah.
And I think it comes back to, you and I had a conversation, and we might pick up on it later, about this sort of human behavior and psychology, has got a huge interest in that. I know we want people to be factual, and I'm not underestimating that we need to be factual, i.e. we don't need to put stuff out there, but I don't think I have ever, you know, made a significant purchase decision on purely on a factual basis. You know, there's an emotive element to it, isn't there? And I think we sometimes as farmers underestimate that. I think we also sometimes don't do ourselves any favors, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're in an industry where it can be, whether we know it or not, or even as busy as farms are, you can still be quite lonely.
Yeah.
And so I do think that social media is then, and PR is a bit of a community way of sharing with your fellow farmers.
Absolutely.
Which is great, because it hopefully negates or helps to manage some what might become mental health issues if they didn't have somewhere to go and talk. But that information that's put out there can be seen by the rest of the world. So, for example, you know, when we share a picture of that heifer that's got herself stuck in the head yoke and tipped the crate over or whatever, whilst lots of farmers will sympathise with you and go, God, she must have been a bit batty. You know, in a snapshot, you can't give the context, can you, to the consumer? And so sometimes I think some people have posted in the past, and you know, you sort of shake your head. And I think the other thing is it's a bit of an emotional outlet, isn't it, as well? Or it can be an emotional outlet. And therefore it, you know, come back to that view of agriculture and come back to promoting it as an industry. If we're only seen to ever been talking about agriculture in a negative light, i.e. long working hours, it's hard work, the poor prices, you know, pressure that we're under, and none of those things, I'm not devaluing them, I'm not saying that they're not true, I'm not underestimating the impact that they have at farm level. But if that's the external view that we put out, that, you know, does farming look appetizing then?
Yeah.
I don't think, occasionally you see other industries sort of airing the dirty laundry, don't you? But I don't think you quite see it the same as we do in agriculture sometimes.
Yeah. And I suppose linked to that, and I've had this conversation with a number of firms recently, actually, but linking that to recruitment, and so you've got that perception of the industry, and I suppose this is recruitment, both of people who already have some sort of background in farming, whether that's family, whether that's otherwise, but also reaching out to skilled people in other sectors who might have skills that are relevant to agriculture, and trying to get people to think outside the box. Um, what about that perception of farming, and what impact does that have on recruitment?
Well, we are although we're adaptive, and although we probably engage with much more technology and information and knowledge, we're probably much more skilled than the general public would like to give the industry credit for. We are quite traditional in a lot of our views, aren't we?
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, I remember the first time I turned up on farmers, I was fresh-faced out of uni and what have you, and I remember turning up and there was this old boy in the top of Home Firth, which is obviously last of the summer wine country, so you can imagine and I remember this old boy, I turned up on farm, so bearing in mind this was the role we were talking about earlier, where I was like trading standards type. I remember him tapping me on the head. Oh, love. And I took it with a pinch of salt, because but don't even get me started on farmer's wife, farmer's daughter sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
My dad is a farmer, I'm very proud of that. My husband is a farmer, I'm very proud of that. But that looks sort of label. Anyway, sorry, I digress. The image of, we are still quite traditional, and unfortunately it's very hard then to take those glasses off from a recruitment perspective, isn't it? So if you're trying to recruit people into the industry, and it's funny, I read a thread last night, I think it was on online, about that Farming UK had posted, saying that we're struggling to recruit, and all the comments when you read below were from people saying, my son or daughter is desperate to get into farming, but every role said you need experience, and they've tried to get in, or the long working hours are prohibitive, or the expectations of the farmer are prohibitive. It's I think we probably just need to broaden our view, one, of what we've got to offer, and actually what an awesome lifestyle it is.
Yeah.
And two, what, the sort of quid pro quo, really, that, bringing somebody on, if Asda, or any retailer actually for that matter, if any retailer advert said, we want somebody, a store assistant, to come and stack shelves, must have previous store, shelf stacking experience, you'd never get anybody, would you? They don't. They accept that it's a job that's trainable, and okay, stockmanship is something that does develop over time, and technical knowledge develops over time, and there is a bit around the edge that I don't think can be taught without just having a lot of experience in the industry. But putting cups on cows, or using the yard scraper, or moving cows, there are some principles, there are some principles that can be taught. So probably just need to widen our view a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. Tell me about your running. How did you get into that?
Well, again, I mentioned earlier, not all that good at being told what to do. So when lockdown came and I was told to stay inside, I suddenly decided that I needed to be outside. No, I laugh and I jest at that. I am a people person. I really, actually, as much as I don't do as much driving nowadays, I really enjoy my driving time in the car, a bit of thinking time, dead time where you're not on it. So at the beginning of lockdown, when I was basically glued to a computer screen, decided that I needed to take a little bit of time out every day, or every other day, just to get away from the screen. Also combined with, as you mentioned, I have a big cheese fetish. Well, I have basically a food fetish and a drink fetish, actually. And my office is far too close to the kitchen. So it was probably twofold. One being that I could have eaten myself stupid in lockdown, and 2, that I just needed a bit of headspace away from the computer, and running was a way to do that. I'd started the couch to 5K probably 2 or 3 times in the past and never persisted with it, but just started the couch, literally couch to 5K, did 60 seconds running, thought I was going to die. I only ever run previous to that if I was trying to beat some livestock to the gate, literally, and even then I would, I could do short, sharp distances, but never anything significant. So just couch 5K, completed that. In fact, I think it was Adam Bedford that once, I think I told him that I'd started that. Well, I can't remember why we were talking one day.
Okay.
And he said, well, that's not for people that are fit. And I was like, well, I'm not fit. It's very different being, having strength fitness, as most farmers do, to being aerobically fit.
Yeah, like proper cardio. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you're someone who likes to achieve. And I mean, with this as well, so you went from your couch to your 5K to the London Marathon. How did that come about, and what was that like?
It was awesome. I am someone that likes to achieve, so don't mention those 6 seconds over the 4-hour time, because otherwise...
Oh, I know. I felt
4
for you
hours,
so
6
much, because I
seconds.
sort of knew, I know what she's thinking.
I am extremely proud of myself. I have to not make that a thing,
Absolutely.
Otherwise I'll have to run it again.
Yeah.
How did it come about? Oh, again, very active on Twitter. Yellow Wellies had put out that they'd been awarded a charity place, and quite a few people tagged me. So this was in the spring after Run 1000 last year, which I'd been fairly active with Charles Einan as captain of their Team England. So I'd been really engaged in a lot of running in January. Yellow Wellies had put out a tweet saying, basically, we need somebody to fill this spot. Quite a few people tagged me in it, which then you sort of do the, I don't like to not achieve. Sort of ummed and ahed. And you had to fill out a piece of paper that basically said why you wanted to do it, how you would make sure that you hit the fundraising targets, and 1 or 2 other bits. And I was a bit indifferent until I hit send on the piece of paper. And then as my achievement brain goes, it was like, well, now you've said you want to do it. You must want to do it. So now you need to get the place. So then I mounted a small Twitter campaign to mildly influence Yellow Wellies into giving me the place, which seemed to work. So I think barefaced Yorkshire cheek. And then got, I think the email or rang to basically say you've got the place, and as they say, the rest is history.
You also listen to a lot of audiobooks and read a lot of books on people and leadership. I'm wondering, because I know that there are quite a few listeners who have a similar interest. So, I mean, have you got any recommendations?
Entry level so it was about understanding myself originally. So, part of this sense of achievement and all, just trying to debunk my brain, really. So I started with, and probably would still advise most people to start with, Steve Peters' Chimp Paradox, just to understand how your brain works. And so it talks about your monkey brain and then your thinking brain, so your rational brain and your innate brain. And it explains to you things like why, if somebody cuts you up, you basically engage in road rage. Logically that makes no sense at all, but your innate brain, your monkey brain, reacts to being challenged, and so you drive like a lunatic for the next 50 miles down the motorway. All been there. If you want a slightly more advanced version of Chimp Paradox, and Chimp Paradox lost me a little bit at the end because it went a bit wacky in the last couple of chapters, but the better version of that, but I don't know if you need to start with Chimp Paradox first, if that makes sense, but is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah, of course.
If you want to start to think and about sort of self-efficacy and performance and achievement, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits.
Yeah.
And
I am just writing all these down, by the way.
And then my other favourite person, who just, when he talks, I feel like he's talking to me is Simon Sinek, Start With Why. And well, it Start With Why was his original book, and then he's got Why Leaders Eat Last. What's his other one called? Anyway, and he talks about, well, his sort of key phrase, which is actually on the top of my Twitter profile, is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do just serves to prove what you believe, what, you know, why.
Yep.
He's really brilliant. I think that's it. But behavioral economics, if you're interested in, you know, human behavior and how that influences buying decisions, and which again sort of links into my job and a bit of the PR stuff. Rory Sutherland's is called Alchemy, the Power of Ideas That Don't Make Sense.
Yeah,
there's some incredible examples in there of, you know, like they tested something with, well, the example that they give is Red Bull. You know, if you went and said to the marketing department, you know, we want to create a drink that is more, you know, to rival Coca-Cola, that is, you know, but we're going to make the drink in smaller cans, we're going to make it more expensive, and we're going to make it taste disgusting. You know, the marketing department would have thought you were nuts, but you know, that was their strategy. And I think the feedback they got originally when they tested Red Bull was like, you know, literally the worst drink I've ever drunk. But then that sort of meets with the tagline of, you know, gives you wings. It can't. I think there's another example of medicines that, you know, basically people can't make medicine taste nice because otherwise you don't believe that it'll make you better. You know, it has to taste disgusting to make you feel better.
Yeah. What about what's next for you? Plans for the future? What do you still want to achieve?
I'm incredibly happy in the kite business. I really feel like I fit, and they're a company that, like, I've never worked for. They you know, let people be good at what they're good at, and they challenge them to develop themselves and develop the business. You know, the right amount of do what you're good at and challenge you to do better, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think, although if I say this out loud, I probably have to do something about it. I think I would like to do the challenge of rural leadership.
There we are.
I know.
Committed now.
I know. Bedders and Rachel Hallas and a few others keep giving me the nudge, and I keep telling myself I haven't got enough time, and all those usual rubbish excuses.
Yeah.
When you know you're just going to have to do it, and I will have to do it before I get too old, because I think they stop taking you at a certain point, don't they? I think you become too old to be challenged.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think personal development for me, and probably understanding more, and ultimately, you know, I feel like I'm succeeding and doing good things when farmers that I work with are succeeding and doing good things. So whatever that takes, really.
Brilliant. We always finish the show with the same two questions, which I'm going to ask you now. The first is, if you have a message for the public, what would it be?
That agriculture is a really exciting and innovative and fantastic industry to be involved in, and that is true whether you're at farm level or whether you're at, you know, food output level in the food sector. It's, you know, and the people that work in agriculture are extremely, farmers are extremely good people at heart. We hold some very dear values, and, you know, do the right things for the right reasons. You know, I think farmers more than anybody have a really holistic view of the world. You know, I think, and I don't think that necessarily gets appreciated all the time. It's a wonderful place to work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. And talking of farmers, finally, a message from you, Becki Leach, to farmers.
My message to farmers is that they're much better than they give themselves credit for. You know, the farmers are literally the best innovators. If you've ever seen any farm inventions, and I'm very fortunate doing the Kite Twitter, I get sent lots of pictures of farmer inventions. You know, we are the solution finders to problems. I think, you know, acknowledge what you're good at, and trust that whatever challenges and opportunities come down the line, there'll be a thriving agricultural industry in 5, 10, 20, 50 years' time. It might not look the same as it does now, but we will survive and we will thrive.
Oh, fantastic. I think that's a really good positive point. And, as on the Kite podcast, normally we always love to leave them a positive. So let's leave this one a positive as well. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Becki, for coming on. It was a real pleasure having you here finally. And I'm sure that listeners will love listening to your story. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next time, I am speaking to journalist and broadcaster and founder of Just Farmers, Anna Jones, about her brand new book, which I need to read before I speak to her. But I'm really excited to get going with that and talking to her about the challenges, let's say that, between urban and rural environments. So I hope you can join me then. But until then, have a great week.
And for too long, for my entire lifetime, and probably long before I was born, too many farmers have moaned and whinged that they don't understand us, they don't know where their food comes from, they don't have a clue about farming, they don't respect the countryside, all of this. And it's like, well, actually, I want to call that out now and say, well, how much are you trying to understand them? Do you ever go to a city? Do you ever spend your free time in a city? A lot of farmers I speak to take some kind of weird pride in the fact that they've never been to a city. I never go to the city, never been to London, never been to London, no interest in it.
Yeah.
And I've never spent a night away from the farm. My cousin has never been on a train.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's wrong. You can't moan about a way of life you've never even attempted to understand yourself.